Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Loretta Minghella, and I'm the Director of Christian Aid. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Christian Aid, Amnesty, and the Gender and Development Network, whether you are with us here in the hall or following online. And I'd like to thank Amnesty for hosting us here at their Human Rights Action Centre in London. A few words of housekeeping from me, just rattling through. The fire exits, one at the front, next to the stage, two at the back at both ends, collection point on the pavement in front of the main entrance. Toilets are through the red doors, left downstairs. If you wish to use the lift, go to -3. This floor is -1. Mobile phones, please switch them off or put them to silent. Smokers, please go outside and away from the front door. And for those of you who are tweeting, the hashtag, please, is hashtag girls and women. Now, I'd like to extend a particular welcome to the Secretary of State, the Right Honourable Justine Greening, and thank her and her team for working with us to put together this important event. Last month, the Secretary of State gave a passionate speech setting out her agenda for her department. The eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that women and girls were listed first in her priorities, and I'm delighted that she's chosen to follow it up today with a dedicated speech about what she means by that. Just as we gather here today, so too thousands are gathering in New York for the commencement of the 57th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. Later this week, we will mark International Women's Day. Why the need for these meetings and these moments? The stark truth is that a girl born today in a rich country or a poor one will be in many respects treated as a second-class citizen. Women represent in the order of 70% of those living in extreme poverty. Globally, women do twice as much unpaid work as men. In developing countries, perhaps 10 times as much. Violence against women is endemic. 6 out of 10 women globally experiencing physical and/or sexual violence in their lifetime. The brutal attack on Malala for promoting education in Pakistan, the rape and murder of a student in Delhi, and the marketing of Keep Calm and Rape a Lot T-shirts online here in the UK are all recent reminders of how far we have to go to tackle this problem. Gender inequality is not driven by accident of birth, but by issues of power, whether personal, social, economic, or political. It is born out of absences of power and abuse of power. And since power concedes nothing without a demand, we must make that demand. Whilst there is much to be done, 2013 brings many opportunities for progress, and I want to highlight just a few on which I hope the Secretary of State will shortly elaborate further. This year's CSW session in New York will focus on the issue of violence against women and girls as its priority theme and consider the place of gender in the post-MDG framework as its emerging theme. This dual focus captures well the challenges we face, the urgent and vital action required to end the vulnerability of women to a pandemic of gender-based violence, but also the opportunities to work for deep-rooted social change that promotes the rights of women and girls across all aspects of private and public life. Another key development we're watching this year is the Preventing Sexual Violence initiative led by the Foreign Office in the context of the G8. The impact of violence against women is seen only too clearly in countries like Afghanistan, where 87% of women face abuse and violence. We must support and protect women human rights defenders who lead the fight for women to live free from violence and abuse. Their voices must be protected and raised up so that women can help shape their country's future. Looking longer term, it's encouraging that the Secretary of State's already stressed that gender should be at the heart of the post-MDG development framework. The Gender and Development Network argues cogently for a standalone goal on gender as vital to delivering the necessary political will and resources to have any chance of achieving gender equality. Such a clear focus would help ensure that gender is also mainstreamed throughout other targets such as education, health and food security. These are some of the challenges and opportunities we face. We all have a stake in responding to them, women and men, mothers and fathers, daughters and sons. I look forward to hearing the Secretary of State's vision for how DFID will put women and girls at the heart of development. And I look forward, along with all of you here, to working in partnership to make that shared vision a reality. Would you please welcome the Secretary of State, Justine Greening.
Well, thank you, Loretta, for that introduction, and also thank you to Kate Allen and Amnesty for hosting and helping us put together this event today. And then finally, I'd like to say thank you to the DFID officials who've been working with me on this whole women and girls agenda. Although I get to give the speech, there's a huge amount of work that happens behind the scenes from many of the people that I'm sure you'll be working with day to day too. I've really had, since I came into this role, the privilege of meeting many committed and inspirational people since I started. But I can honestly say that the people I've met who've inspired me most have been girls and women campaigning for their rights. As I said, I'm delighted to be here, hosted by GadNet, Christian Aid, and Amnesty International. Your organisations and partners have been at the forefront of the movement for girls and women's rights for many years. These are issues that the UK has rightly prioritised at home and overseas, and I'm very proud of the UK's commitment to international development assistance, and particularly in relation to girls and women. And before I get on to the challenges that I think we face, it's probably worth reflecting on the fact that we have nevertheless come a very long way. Here in Britain, we've always been at the forefront of the campaign for women's rights. And this is brought home to me every time I take a group of school children on a tour around Parliament. I always show them a statue of Viscount Falkland in St Stephen's lobby. He's a slightly obscure peer from the 17th century, but what I point out to them are the cracks and chips on the statue. And none of the children are ever able to guess where these came from. So I tell them that in 1909, a woman called Marjorie Hume chained herself to the statue as a protest, shouting, "Deeds, not words," and demanding a right to vote. And the statue was damaged as they desperately tried to remove her. And so it stands to this day as a small reminder of the struggle faced by women for an equal voice. And of course, you'll all be able to guess the reaction when I ask the girls on the tour whether it should just be for the boys to decide what happens in Britain. I also recently had a reminder how far we've come when I met up with Donald Steinberg in Dublin, the Deputy Administrator at USAID. He told me the story of Madeleine Albright's very young granddaughter who, on learning of John Kerry's new role taking over from Hillary Clinton, asked her mother if men could be the US Secretary of State. And it very much reminded me of my own childhood, though, growing up in Britain, a Britain that had a queen as head of state and a female prime minister. I think for those women that have gone before us, we can be proud of their achievements and we can be grateful. Because for so many of us, the world is a place with so much more opportunity. So today, everything I want to talk about really revolves around two things: hope and intent. Hope, because I do believe we can move the agenda on and progress can continue. Intent, because I intend to target DFID's efforts relentlessly on improving the lives of the poorest girls and women around the world. The future is never fixed, and it can be different. I've recently said that where half the population is locked out, prevented from being productive and from pursuing opportunities, there isn't a sustainable path to development. Investing in girls and women is the smart thing to do. By unleashing their potential, we see incredible returns for girls and women themselves, for their families and communities, for their economies and countries. Some people have called it the girl effect. In education, we know that getting girls through primary and secondary school works. An extra year of primary schooling for girls increases their wages by up to 20%, and for secondary school, it's even higher. More time in education means that girls face a lower risk of sexual violence, They marry later, have fewer children, and have better health outcomes for the children they do have. It's better for them and their families. We know that when a woman generates her own income, she reinvests 90% of it in her family and community. And it's better for their economies and countries. In India, the states with more women in work have seen faster economic growth and the largest reductions in poverty. In Pakistan, women entering the national parliament on a gender quota were able to work successfully across party lines on legislation relating to honour killing and acid crime control. Countries with higher civic engagement and stronger attitudes towards equality and fairness towards women have significantly higher levels of per capita income in the long run. But of course, investing in girls and women isn't just the smart thing to do, it's also the right thing to do. This is a matter of universal, basic human rights. It's about girls' and women's right to have control over their own bodies, to have a voice in their community and country, to live free of the fear of violence, to choose who to marry and when. It's about their right to education, which gives them a chance at productive work and a chance to choose how they spend the money that they earn. Locking out women isn't just bad for an economy, it's bad for a society. And it seems common sense, but it's still happening. From the very start, girls lose out. They lose out at school, with less than 1 in 5 girls in sub-Saharan Africa making it to secondary school. They lose out when they're married, with 1/3 of girls in the developing world marrying before the age of 18, some as young as 7 years old. And when they have the first child, in spite of dramatic progress, medical complications from pregnancy and childbirth are still the leading cause of death amongst 15 to 19-year-old girls worldwide. Women perform 2/3 of the world's work, produce half of the food, but earn only 10% of the income and own only 1% of the property. More broadly, all too often, a woman's place in their community and society is downgraded. In 11 countries, the testimony of a woman carries less evidentiary weight in court than that of a man. And although women make up more than half the population, they represent only 20% of political leaders in the world. It may be over 100 years since Marjorie Hume changed herself to Viscount Falkland statue, but of all the political leaders of political parties that have come and gone in the UK since, and there have been 45 of them to date, Margaret Thatcher still remains the only woman to have led a major political party in Britain. Perhaps most unacceptably, how women are physically treated is often underpinned by violence. And around the world, 1 in 3 girls and women will be beaten or raped in their lifetime. And perhaps this statistic is so shocking that it simply overwhelms us. But we urgently need irreversible gains in the rights for girls and women and an end to violence against girls and women. I believe that these issues represent the greatest unmet challenges of our time, not some sideline issue, and we cannot turn a blind eye. Nearly 100 years after women in Britain got the vote, 180 years after the abolition of slavery, gaining the most basic human rights for women around our world right now remains perhaps the most profound human challenge the world has. So today I'm going to set out both what DFID's role needs to be to achieve this and why I think there has never been a more important time for us all to up our game. DFID has already made changing the lives of girls and women a core priority. We launched the strategic vision for girls and women back in 2011, and since then our country has helped to change the lives of millions for the better. Thanks to the UK, last year over 2.5 million girls took their first steps into primary school, with 250,000 making the crucial transition into secondary school. I saw for myself the transformational education programme DFID is helping to fund in Pakistan. Girls with big ideas about what jobs they'd like to do when they became older. Teachers, doctors, scientists. And I remember when I was growing up in Rotherham in the 1980s, I had ideas. I wasn't sure what they'd amount to, but I knew that education was my first step. They knew it too, and who knows what they can achieve with the opportunity. It's not just education. Last year, we helped nearly 750,000 women access financial services. We secured property and land rights for nearly 250,000 women and supported 1 million additional women to use more modern methods of family planning. But now I want us to be more ambitious still. I want us to do more. This is about more than increasing access to schools or providing healthcare services. It's about looking deeper, getting under the skin of the problem. And as I see it, it comes down to 3 issues of choice, voice, and control. So what about choice? Well, we're going to continue DFID's work on education, which is absolutely fundamental to giving girls more choice. But it's not just about getting girls into school. It's about what they do while they're there and why they often leave. We need to address the underlying causes of why girls drop out, and our Girls' Education Challenge is already delivering a step change, getting an extra 1 million of the world's poorest girls into school by 2016 and giving them a better quality education when they're there. The London Summit on Family Planning last year was the starting point for determined UK action on family planning, and of the goal we have set, with others, to enable an extra 120 million girls and women in the world's poorest countries to use voluntary family planning by 2020. But I think it's not enough, and that's why today I'm announcing that DFID has released further funding to deliver over 3 million contraceptive implants and 17 million female condoms. This investment will help avert around 2.6 million unintended pregnancies, prevent the deaths of more than 4,500 women during pregnancy, and avoid almost 65,000 infant deaths, and we will look to do more still. What about control? Well, I've recently come back from Pakistan, as I said, where last year Malala Yousafzai's case highlighted the difficulties for girls and women, but also the hope that so many girls have for a better future. She was a young girl shot for simply trying to go to school and for being brave enough to speak up about the right to education for all. Another recent high-profile and horrific case we all know of, Delhi in December. A young student simply trying to get home is gang raped and dies. These individual high-profile cases are the tip of an enormous iceberg of violations against girls' and women's rights. It happens on a day-to-day basis, and it's simply routine. And I think that violence against girls and women is a pandemic. I can tell you about a woman you'll never have heard of. She's called Nusrat, from Punjab in Pakistan. Nusrat suffered extensive burns from an acid attack after refusing an attempted forced marriage. Just to report her case, Nusrat had to overcome the social stigma of reporting such a crime, the fear that it would bring dishonour on her family. Nusrat has been supported to get her life back on track by the Acid Survivors Foundation, one of a number of UK aid-backed initiatives in Pakistan. Treating the terrible symptoms of attacks like this is crucial, but not enough. We also need to tackle the attitudes and the social norms that are the root causes. We need to tackle the culture of impunity. Nusrat and other acid attack victims are campaigning for the introduction of a new acid and burn crime bill in Pakistan so it can improve the process of reporting, investigation, collecting medical evidence, compensation for rehabilitation, and protection for the victim and witnesses. All these stories show how injustice is woven into and across the fabric of societies and economies, in legal frameworks, in how institutions run, and in governments. And this injustice reinforces the lack of power that girls and women then have within their own households, communities, and societies. But there is hope. And as challenging as these stories and statistics are, ordinary people's reactions show the hope we can all have. The girls in Pakistan supporting Malala, the street protests following the Delhi rape. Here in the UK, less than 3 weeks after we launched it, more than 25,000 people have signed the online pledge on our DFID website calling for action to stop violence against women and girls at the UN. If you haven't already, please go online and join us. We've also been working with our partners like Sonka Gender Justice in South Africa, who enlist men and boys in support of gender equality for the fantastic V-Day campaign. Thank you to everybody who's been involved in all of these initiatives. One voice can be ignored, but millions can't. They all demonstrate that people, men and women, are not prepared to sit on the sidelines and accept failure. The message is loud and clear. We will not accept that there is no end to endemic violence against girls and women, and we will work persistently, relentlessly for the change that we need at government level, at an institutional level, at an economic level, at a personal and attitudinal level to bring that change about. So where does DFID fit in? Well, DFID is shifting up a gear on its work on violence against women and girls. We set up a £25 million research and innovation fund to find out what works, tying into new programmes helping the specific needs of women and girls in current emergencies in DRC and the Syrian refugees. And to make sure we keep the momentum after this year's UN Commission on the Status of Women, I will be launching an international call to action on violence against women and girls in humanitarian emergencies with a summit in the autumn, bringing agencies, donors and advocates together to make sure that we up our game. I have today written to the UN's Emergency Relief Coordinator, Valerie Amos, and the UN Secretary-General to call on them to put the needs of women and girls clearly at the heart of humanitarian programmes, including in Syria. I'd also like to pay tribute to the work that my ministerial colleague, Lynn Featherstone, is putting into developing the ambitious agenda we want to see, which aims to end female genital mutilation within a generation. And we cannot be afraid of tackling contentious and sensitive issues. The UK is one of only a handful of donors with a clear policy that lays out how we can improve access to safe abortion. Unsafe abortion leads to the death of 47,000 women and girls every year and leaves another 8.5 million harmed. And in Afghanistan, I want to make it clear today that our Afghanistan country plan will have tackling violence against women and girls as a country strategic priority, to do whatever the UK can to ensure the gains for girls and women in Afghanistan are not lost and instead can be built upon. Kate, I know you have raised this with me in the past. I think you're right, and that's why we are making this a country strategic priority. What about control and economic empowerment? Girls and women are telling us loudly and clearly that their priority is jobs. Taking control of their lives through education and getting skills, having access to credit, supply chains, support for their farms and businesses so that they can earn a decent wage and have control over how they spend their income. The economic empowerment of girls and women is essential to achieve gender equality, women's rights and wider development outcomes. But women face a range of barriers. They're often unable to own property in their own name. They're often unable to open a bank account, access credit, or register a business. In Kenya, more than 85% of loans require collateral. That's usually land with a registered title. Yet women only hold 1% of registered land titles. Restrictions on women's mobility also prevent them from accessing economic opportunities. In a number of countries, women require their husband's permission to travel outside the home, to apply for a passport, or to travel outside the country. DFID already has a number of programmes to try and help remove those barriers. But I can announce that I've just committed up to £11.5 million to a new partnership with the World Bank for a gender innovation lab on girls and women's economic empowerment, testing what works in terms of giving girls and women control over their economic lives in sub-Saharan Africa. This evidence base isn't just going to help DFID do better programmes that can help more girls and women, it's going to help other governments, donors and NGOs. So we will focus on choice and on control. But finally, women and girls must have a voice. Research clearly demonstrates that women's political participation achieves real changes in policy choices and in social and political institutions. For example, in villages in West Bengal and Rajasthan where women hold leadership roles, there is more likely to be increased investment in public services and infrastructure. Like much of this agenda, the investment we make to change laws and to change attitudes can take a generation to truly feed through, but it is worth it. And I'm delighted to announce that over the next 3 years, the UK will be funding the Leadership for Change programme. It will support the leadership skills and opportunities of more than 50,000 girls and women to be able to make a difference in their local communities and nationally. And indeed, in just 3 days after launching the programme, we'd already had thousands of applications from women around the world. All of this is about harnessing the power of role models as well. Women like Joyce Banda, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Aung San Suu Kyi, and I will make sure I do what I can in my own role, working alongside others to give women a voice and to have them listened to. History shows us that pushing on the right issues, but critically also at the right time, catching the mood, catching the momentum of the time, is key to success. And I believe that this is the right time to press for change. As Loretta said, this year offers us a series of opportunities to put girls and women centre stage. The UK will use every international opportunity to stand up for the rights of girls and women. We have all got to put our energy, creativity and commitment to make the most of the big events that we've got coming up. This week, International Women's Day on the 8th of March is a key event to focus minds on change. And during our G8 presidency, we're working across government, supporting the Foreign Secretary's vital Preventing Sexual Violence initiative to ensure that G8 members sign up to pledges on this unacceptably neglected issue. The UK is working tirelessly to ensure that the Commission on the Status of Women this year reaches agreed strong conclusions. And both myself and Lynn Featherstone are playing our role in beating the drum, lobbying, making the calls we need to, coordinating supporters to make sure that we play our role to get a successful outcome. DFID's next multilateral aid review, which takes place in 2015, will assess agencies' performance on the rights of women and girls. And at the UN, we will aim to play a championing role at the General Assembly special session on the Millennium Development Goals review in September this year. We're in discussions with the US on a gender theme for the MDG Countdown event as well. And I hope that I can use my role as the co-chair of the Global Partnership to ensure that progress is made on the Busan Gender Action Plan. And the UK will continue to be a voice for the sexual and reproductive health rights at the International Conference on Population Development next year, 20 years on from the landmark Cairo meeting that recognised the importance of these rights. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we have the post-2015 agenda. I believe that only if we address issues of voice, choice and control for girls and women in the post-2015 framework will it have the potential to end poverty in our lifetime. Like Loretta, I personally believe that we need both a standalone goal and the mainstreaming of gender through the new development framework, and it must explicitly deliver on an aim of eliminating violence against women and girls. I recently said we won't get anywhere by shouting louder. I also believe we won't get anywhere by simply preaching to the converted. DFID can only achieve progress working with others. First and foremost, we must work with boys and men as partners in challenging discrimination and violence against girls and women. The Leadership for Change programme I just talked about will build the evidence base on how working with boys and men can really make a difference. We also need to look to the private sector, and I'll say more about this in a speech next week. Investing in women has become more than a good corporate social responsibility initiative for companies. As I said at the beginning, investing in girls and women works, and it's becoming increasingly a core business strategy that yields real investor returns. We need everyone on board, and that's why I'll be establishing an expert advisory group on girls and women, people from different worlds to include leaders from the human rights community and the private sector and CSOs feeding into DFID's work. The British taxpayer is also a stakeholder in this work and hugely generous, especially during campaigns such as Red Nose Day. We've asked Comic Relief to design projects that will change the lives of over 500,000 girls and women in the world's poorest countries, and we will double the money raised for that work. Finally, I've talked a lot about what we need to achieve internationally. But what about Britain? I don't think we can engage credibly with others if we're not tackling our own issues at home. 100 years ago, this year, in 1913, Emmeline Pankhurst was arrested for demanding women's right to vote. Some of the suffragettes went on hunger strike, as she did. Others found incredibly creative ways to get their message across. Just round the corner in Parliament from Viscount Falkland's statue is the Westminster Hall crypt, where Emily Davidson Wilding hid in the cupboard so that when it was the census she could put her address down as the House of Commons. I've always felt, in many respects, that it was a political and social movement that was really the first modern campaign we might have recognised today, and it worked. But what would they think of Britain and women's rights today? 100 years later, and we've seen just one female leader of the main political party, just one female prime minister. In 2010, women made up just 12.5% of the boards of FTSE 100 companies. 2/3 of public appointments go to men. 90% of chief constables and the police and crime commissioners are male, and 2/3 of local councillors are male. We said for the G8 we need to get our own house in order, and that applies to this too. Britain needs to play a leading role globally, not just by effort, and as I've set out we will, but by example too. And we must all ask the searching questions and never turn a blind eye to women treated unacceptably in our own country. We will fight for the rights of girls and women when we go to New York at this year's Vital Commission on the Status of Women. But it's what we must all fight for here in Britain too. And I applaud my colleagues Theresa May and Maria Miller, who are taking the lead across government on this agenda domestically. Ultimately, I believe in a world where the ladder of opportunity in an economy, in a society, is there for us all to climb, not just the few. It shouldn't matter where you start. We have the chance, and I believe the responsibility, to play our part in empowering girls and women to climb up to the next rung, and then the next, and then the next. We need to help one another, and there is room for everyone. Despite all the odds, women like Ellen Johnson Sirleaf have reached the top. These role models are critical to pushing the boundaries of what society expects of girls and women, but they need to become the best of a mass of women who make it, not the minority. I want to make sure that the UK leaves no stone unturned in rising to this greatest unmet challenge of our time. I urge you to continue your efforts, to work with new partners, whatever it takes, whoever it takes, and I can assure you that the UK government stands side by side with you. When people look back, let's be the generation that not only could do, but did do. The history we will create is still ahead of us. Let's make sure it's the right one. Thank you.
So, Secretary of State, thank you very much for your speech there, which, as you can see, hugely well received. We have with us today organisations and individuals who have worked on issues around women and girls and development, human rights for many, many years. And I'm very pleased to be able to open up today's meeting for questions. And we will start with Jessica Woodruff, who is Director of the Gender and Development Network, who will say a few words, and then I'll open up to you for questions and comments. And I would ask you to keep them very short. So if you could tell us your name, your organisation, if you're from an organisation, and please do keep them very short because we have about 10-15 minutes for a Q&A. So Jessica, if you'd like to start.
Thank you. Well, Secretary of State, you can imagine how delighted we are that you've chosen to give one of a small number of keynote speeches on this issue, and even more delighted by the focus that you've given. The one sentence that pleased me most in all of that was where you said that focusing on women and girls is not just the smart thing to do, but it's also the right thing to do. And I think that's something that we've been arguing for a long time, and we're very, very pleased to hear that recognised at HMG level. It is an issue of basic human rights, as you said, and it's delightful to hear that. The issues that you around education and reproductive rights, which you mentioned, are of course very welcome. I know that there's a lot of people who work on both of those sectors in the audience, so I'm not going to dwell on those. Within the Gender and Development Network, the three issues that we've been particularly looking at are violence against women, and you mentioned the right to live free from violence, economic empowerment, and again you touched on this about the importance of women being able to not just earn their own income with decent jobs, but also to be able to control what happens to that income, which is particularly important. And then finally on political participation, where we have to see a sea change there, where women can not just fully participate in political life, but actually have an influence on outcomes. So very welcome to hear those three issues. You mentioned intent and hope, and I wondered if I could make two comments, one on intent and one on hope. The intent being the immediate opportunity of the post-2015 framework. And again, it's extremely good to hear you saying that you recognise that gender needs to be not only mainstreamed, but also that we need to have a specific goal on gender equality. And I think one of the things that we fear with the current interest, if I can put it like that, in women and girls, is that everybody will talk about women and girls and then tick that box without actually making that political commitment. And we do feel that having that specific goal on gender equality and women's empowerment is the way to show the political leadership and ensure that the resources are provided to make that happen. We know that the Prime Minister's position on the high-level panel is extremely important, and he'll be pushing for that, but we also hope that DFID can use its influence beyond the high-level panel towards ensuring that when the Secretary-General makes his speech in the autumn to the General Assembly, that a dedicated goal on gender equality and women's empowerment is part of that. And then moving on to hope. I hope that one day that we can recognise that the burden of unpaid care is one of the major challenges behind many of the things that you said. That women's role as the major providers of childcare, care for the elderly, and all the other domestic tasks that women do without remuneration, that those tasks are often the reasons why women can't seize the opportunities of decent work. They can't seize the opportunities of education, and they can't seize the opportunities of political life. Now, I say it as a hope rather than an intent, because I know that it's not high on the political agenda at the moment, but it would be wonderful to see you using your leadership to get that issue higher up the agenda in the future. And just finally, I'm delighted that in the week of International Women's Day we can have this meeting, but I'm even more excited about working with you and your department the rest of the year on putting women and girls at the heart of what you do. Okay.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And if I could see hands now. Okay, so one here, woman there, and here. So that's three, and then we'll stop and ask the Secretary of State to respond.
Hello, I'm Rachel Carter from Womankind Worldwide, and I'm also the chair of the Gender and Development Network. Thank you for your inspiring and reassuring speech. I was really particularly pleased to hear about your intent to tackle attitudes, social norms, and the culture of impunity on violence against women. And of course, that's integral to the enabling environment in your strategy on women and girls as well. And we know this is one of the harder areas to tackle, but it's really great to hear that that was central to your plans. My question is that women's organisations have a critical role to play in achieving this, and I just wanted to ask you how you will ensure that DFID continues to support them as a central part of the solutions that you're seeking.
Angela Salt from VSO UK. Thanks for your speech, and particularly the passion and the commitment there, both on a personal and political level, which I think we all appreciate. Focusing particularly on increasing the influence women have on decisions and affecting decisions that affect their own lives, and focusing particularly on the values of target incentivising action. Do you think it's worth having a specific target in that area?
Victoria Forsgate from Restless Development. Thank you very much for your speech. I think, kind of reflecting on it, and so much of what you said, you could almost substitute women and girls with young people when we're talking about a lot of these issues, be it around jobs, political participation, family planning, property rights. In many ways, the issues often fold together. And when we're talking about solutions like challenging attitudes and social norms, again, I think young people hold a lot of the kind of solutions to addressing those. So I'd be interested to hear kind of your reflections on that. How do you see young people and gender folding together in the post-2015 framework?
Okay. Thank you for those questions and also for that response. I think although a lot of what DFID does is focused on achieving really tangible results, and that's the right thing to do, I actually think that being clear that there are some things we do work on that have much more longer term, less quantifiable changes, and this issue of attitudes and social norms, I think, is one of them, is really important. And I've asked within the department whether we can do more work to see whether there's any way in which we can try and do a better demonstration, if you like, of seeing progress and how we can maybe start to quantify that in a way that means it can stand alongside other programmes more effectively. And we will continue to work with organisations that are in this area as we do now. I'm just looking at how we need to refresh the PPA approach that we've taken going forward, and I'll be making an announcement on that very shortly. I think it is important that we see not just the large organisations in Britain, but also smaller ones that can sometimes innovate and try out new things, and we can learn from them. I think it's important that we have a voluntary sector in Britain that helps support them as they grow, and that's certainly what I want to see. Angela, you talked about specific targets. I have to say I've never so philosophically per se been into targets, but I think they can work. And so from my perspective, if that's what we need, then that's something that I'll be quite happy to support. I think the issue, as you said at the beginning, though, is really you can have lots of fine words and lots of targets, but you've got to make sure you've got the action plans behind them to actually deliver, which is why I think sometimes just having some really clear-cut, specific targets is the best way to galvanise effort, and I think that's why the post-2015 debate is so important in this area. Finally, Victoria, on young people, you're definitely preaching to the converted here. I think that when I look at my role in DFID, one of the things I really want to do here in the UK is reach out to young people who do understand this agenda, do understand why it matters. And I was at one of my local universities, Roehampton, talking to some of their students recently about this, and I'm going to look at how we can in a more structured way, engage with young people in Britain. I think for young people in developing countries, I think you're absolutely right. And it comes back to the first point, really, which is many of the investments that we make in this particular area, as I said in my speech, don't change things today, they don't change them tomorrow, but they do change them in about 5, 10, 15 years' time, and we need to be prepared to stay the course on some of these longer-term initiatives in order to see them come to fruition, and that's precisely what we plan to be able to do.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I could just bring into the room a question that has been tweeted. We're tweeting a lot through this meeting. So Lee Webster asks the Secretary of State, how will DFID ensure funding reaches women's rights organisations on the ground, organisations that are at the forefront of struggle for women's rights and equality? And perhaps I could see a couple of hands over this side of the room. So woman here in the front and the gentleman with his hand up in the red tie.
Thank you. I'm Tanya Barron from Plan UK. Thank you. I thought your focus, your very real focus on women and girls and development is so welcome. And it was a wonderful speech. Thank you. My question is really about early forced marriage. Given the devastating human rights abuse that this affects, I think something like 14 million girls a year, and also perhaps given that DFID has quite a strong programmatic set of experiences to share on this issue, and also going back to something you said, this is something that we have an issue with in this country. My question is whether or not this is something which you as Secretary of State would be prioritising to champion globally, for example, at next year's UN, with a call for a resolution to end child marriage.
Thank you.
Hello, Tim Wainwright from AD International. We work with disabled people in Africa and Asia. Thank you, Secretary of State, for a great speech. Just a couple of points and a question around disabled women. There are 1 billion disabled people in the world, and disabled women are a higher percentage of the wider number of disabled people than men. And if we look at violence against women, which you mentioned a number of times, there are many studies that show that disabled women are much more vulnerable to this than non-disabled, sometimes 2 to 3 times more vulnerable. And yet many programs that tackle violence against women don't explicitly check whether disabled women are included. So I wondered if you thought there was any merit in looking ahead, making sure that data is disaggregated to show how many disabled people are women reached by such programs. So, thank you.
Just in response to the first point that was tweeted by Lee, first of all, thank you for your tweet, Lee. And we do have a number of programs around the world in our countries which are absolutely aimed at getting to the grassroots. A good example of that would be the Tawamandi program that we've got running in Afghanistan, and I think we've got a lot of learnings from programs like that about how best to structure them so that they can have an impact on the ground, but also so that they're not too bureaucratic. And we have to recognise that where in the UK we'd be used to getting in business proposals and they'd all be completely costed up, that actually, often we're dealing with women who are less able to do that. So we need to make sure that we can achieve results, but actually that we have a realistic process to help work with women who are trying to help. I think we do have a number of programs that are already doing that. And in a sense, I guess part of what I was trying to say today is I think the challenge is to try and do more of that over time, but perhaps to complement it more overtly with some political push from myself, from Lynn, from ministers. So it wasn't just country programs. It was as much about a complementing strategy of us influencing internationally for women and girls and their rights. And that's what we'll plan to do. On early forced marriage and child marriage, it's just a terrible thing that we see, and as I said in my speech, we have some girls who are as young as 7 being married, and I can assure you that I will want to champion that internationally. I think it's massively important, and in a sense, I think what I've been doing with officials, and we've done this in the run-up to the CSW this year, is to look at what we can do, if you like, on the front of the stage, but also what we can do behind the scenes in terms of lobbying people and trying to bring them with us in order to get change. And I think we all have to understand that different countries are in different places, and you're trying to make sure that you pull people in the right direction, but at a pace that's realistic, that doesn't make them totally disengage, which is the worst thing that can happen. Finally, in terms of disability, this is something that both Lynn Featherstone and I are interested in, and Lynn is particularly keen to take forward a lot of this work. I think she's absolutely right in wanting to look at how the department can do that more effectively. If you look at things like vaccination, for example, where a lot of the argument for vaccination is that it produces much more healthy babies and healthy children, actually the other thing it does is it prevents disability. And I think that's often lost in the debate about why why it's a good thing. So I think we are looking at what we can do on that. Whether you can disaggregate information, I think the more information you do have, the better. At the moment, we're focusing on trying to make sure that data is disaggregated by gender. I think let's make sure we've won that, and then, yes, let's move on to understanding disability as well alongside that.
Okay, thank you very much, Secretary of State. I think we'll draw the questions to a close there. Can I just say how much we welcome the government's international leadership on these issues? It is very good to hear those commitments in your speech from the post-2015 agenda, the Preventing Sexual Violence initiative, and the other initiatives that you've talked about today. It's good to hear the issues of violence against women in conflict, for example, in Syria at the moment, will be in the government's mind as you take forward your plans and your diplomacy in that particular situation. I very much welcome your comments, Secretary of State, about Afghanistan. From us at Amnesty, we launch a campaign this week on women in Afghanistan, wanting to make sure that those gains that have been made over the last decade don't disappear as the international troops withdraw next year, and as we see the discussions with the Taliban and others resume. So from Amnesty, thank you very much. From Christian Aid, from the Gender and Development Network, and from Amnesty to say also that we very much agree with your analysis of this being the work of the next 10, 15, 20 years. I think these are the horizons to which we must work, and we must do our work. And with Amnesty, over half of our members are men, and we bring those men to this campaign and to this work, and we'll continue to do it alongside you over that timescale. And I certainly look forward to talking in detail about the actual plans in Afghanistan and how we will start to see that come into practice. So once again, thank you very much, Secretary of State. We have an exhibition and tea and coffee downstairs. You're all very welcome to join us. But please show your appreciation for the Secretary of State's words and speech. Thank you.